today, and it's a pleasure to have you all here. The first thing that I would like to say, I'm sure many of you have attended webinars before, and you're very used to the canned question session at the end of the event. I've insisted that we won't be having any canned questions this time, and so I would try and encourage you to enter some questions via the chat facility. You can do that at any time, and particularly, I suppose, while I go through the actual demonstration part as well, and there. So that's one thing, and as I say, I want to make this session sort of interactive. You'll have obviously been contacted by some of our sales guys telling you about this event and inviting you to come along to the event, and you can expect them obviously to get back in touch, and it'll be great to get your feedback when they sort of speak to you afterwards as well. I will be more than happy as well after this event to do a one-to-one session with any of you as well, if you want to cover off any specifics with regards to requirements that you may have regarding load balancing. It's been some time since we did our last webinar, so obviously we want to provide you with an update on some of the new features that are available in the latest release of ALBX, which currently stands at version 4.2.2. And as well, I'm going to provide a walkthrough of some of the more established sort of load balancer features that we have. And again, the demonstration is not going to be canned, it's going to be live, so anything could happen. I'd like to start with a few slides before the demo to provide a little bit of background on JetNexus and the technology of load balancing as well. So, first of all, who is JetNexus, I guess, would be a good place to start. We're a British technology vendor. We're based in the lovely town of Marlow on the Thames, and a very nice place to work it is indeed. We've been established for 16 years, so it's a good long time. We've been in this business for a good time. We've got a lot of experience around the requirements for load balancing, and we like to feel that we've used that wisely in the product that we've developed. As I say, we're innovative. It's innovative technology for demanding workloads is what we've provided, but we like to do that in a very simple and easy way to consume. We've got a global presence, so as I say, we're based here in Marlow, but we've got distributors and resellers around the world, based in Europe, USA, and Asia. So no matter where customers are, wherever you're based, we've got the people there who can provide support from both sides, from the technical and from the sales aspect. So what about the needs for load balancing and the changes in application consumption and delivery? We're all very familiar with the growth in cloud hosting that has happened, and that has brought about some requirements to sort of reconsider how applications get deployed, how you provide resiliency for applications, and how perhaps you deal with hybrid deployments. So having some stuff in the cloud. JetNexus is in the cloud. We've got an Azure offering of JetNexus, and also obviously other hardware and virtual appliance deployments as well, so we can cover off a hybrid deployment. We've been strongly in the virtualization market as well. That has obviously very much grown. That is a common way now for deploying applications on hosts, and we cover off all bases there, from VMware, Hyper-V, KVM, so we've got an offering everywhere there. And another point that I'd really like to raise regarding load balancing is you may think about some of the main applications, and you may be shifting some of those applications to the cloud, whether that be mail, whether it be CRM systems, or whatever it may be. But a lot of organizations are left with legacy applications, and these applications may still be fundamental to the operation of the business, and you've got to take into account things like security, perhaps broadening out where those applications get used and consumed, perhaps not just within the enterprise but outside. So you may be needing to provide some security to their access those, you may be needing to provide some more resiliency and redundancy to those. So load balancing has got a place pretty much across the spectrum in terms of application deployment. Another area is rapid application development. This is a thing that is obviously very much at the fore now in terms of running up applications. You've got developers there producing new versions of application, and you want to sort of try those out in an environment before they actually get pushed out into full production. And so again, load balancing can help with this. So who is the JetNexus actual product aimed at in terms of sort of customer size out there and sort of people that would benefit from utilizing JetNexus? Well, it's for any web-based application, website or intranet. That is, we've got a key strength in being able to provide load balancing for those types of applications, but we pride ourselves on ease of use and cost effectiveness for deployment in small to medium-sized businesses. So quite often these organizations don't have a full huge IT staff there. They've not got the time to be doing loads of training and getting up to speed with new technology that they may need to deploy within their environment. And so JetNexus is great here in terms of its ease with which it can be used, and hopefully I'll be able to show that during my demonstration. Having said that, the product is very powerful and feature-rich, and so it finds its use in a lot of large enterprises as well. So we sit in front of a lot of email deployments, Exchange email, SharePoint, very much used for in front of unified communication. So you'll see Skype for Business is a key area where JetNexus can be deployed. The other thing that our flexibility helps us with is, as we talked about, sort of cloud consumption of applications, and that can be from any sort of scale. We offer a flexible rental option to aid those companies where they are deploying software as a service or as managed service providers. So they don't necessarily want a huge capital expenditure up front, and we can achieve that with JetNexus. We've got a VIP rental option that means you haven't got to buy a full capacity on an appliance to start straight off with, and you can match that in with the monthly rental that you are charging a customer for yourself. So another key announcement that was made back on the 3rd of February, with big changes regarding JetNexus hardware appliance delivery, and that is related to our HP OEM agreement. So as I say, on the 3rd of February 2017, it was announced that JetNexus, we signed a global OEM agreement with HP to deliver the ALBX load balancer as a hardware appliance using HP server hardware. So for those of you who are familiar with JetNexus in the past, this has replaced the previous E4 and E5 hardware appliances. So the new HP appliances use the latest Intel CPU and memory technology, and so that's very much enhances the ALBX performance in demanding workload situations, including heavily utilization of SSL encrypted traffic. So the latest Intel CPUs are able to are optimized with the code set that's on there, are optimized for decrypting and encrypting SSL traffic, and this allows us really to ride the curve in terms of processor development and platform development for delivering JetNexus as a hardware appliance. We've got a wide range of server models that are available to match price and performance requirements, and the other thing is HP are able to offer a global hardware support agreement with 4-hour response times. HP, as people, if you're familiar with, obviously with the server technology, they have ILO lights out, remote management of the hardware, so this again is an additional enhancement to the deployment of the load balancer as a hardware appliance. And another thing that we've implemented, in the case where a disk swap out is required, so if there was a disk failure and it's a solid state disk that's used in there, so the failure rate is obviously extremely low, but in that rare case where it does happen, the system can be rebuilt in minutes with the existing customer configuration from an embedded SD backup module. So that's something that we've implemented on the new HP platform. So that's a real sort of strength that we've got there. Right, so I think it's time to move on to the demonstration and actually be able to sort of show you the JetNexus product in operation. And as I say, this is not a canned demo. It's not a recording. It will be live, and hopefully we'll show you how simple and easy it is to use the product. Okay, so actually before I do that, right, just hold on. Before I do that, I think it's quite important to position just whereabouts the load balancer sits within your network and show some of the functionality basically that it provides. So we've got this idea of clients out there needing to connect to applications, and that may be from desktop computers, laptop computers, tablets, mobile devices, any myriad of devices to connect into applications. Obviously, more and more commonly, this is web-based applications that we're talking about, but equally, we're adept at load balancing the traditional Microsoft suite of applications. So we've got Skype for Business, so very much UC is in the insurgency. We've got SharePoint and we've got Exchange there, and I can show you during the demonstration just how quick and easy it is to deploy JetNexus for an Exchange load balancing situation. We mentioned before about a lot of the applications are secured now with SSL, and this is a resource-intensive process. And we're depicting here a pair of our shiny new HP appliances here, deployed either in an active-passive mode or in an active-active. So always when deploying a load balancer, we recommend that you deploy a pair so the load balancer functionality doesn't become a single point of failure. Then, sitting on top of that, we've got the load balancer functionality. So basically, requests to access the application will be made from the client and they will be directed at the load balancer. And the operation that this performs is usually as a reverse proxy. So as I say, the connection comes from the client, it terminates on the load balancer, and then the load balancer will spread out those connections over the applications, depending on the algorithm and depending on the setup of the load balancing policy that's been configured. Now, this can be done through a myriad of different means. So JetNexus adds intelligence to the load balancing process, and we do that in the form of things like layer 7 health checks. So clearly, obviously, if you're sending traffic to a server, you want to be sure that it's able to respond to the application request coming from the client. So we're able to take that all the way to layer 7 and ensure that the application is responding correctly. If it doesn't, if we detect that there's a failure, then we will basically take that server offline and stop delivering any requests to it. At the same time, we will send out an alert, and that can be done via email, so that you get proactive notification that there is a problem actually with your server infrastructure, with the application deployment. As we mentioned before, SSL is resource intensive, and so where possible, we can shift that process from being run on the real servers themselves and to put it onto the load balancer. This is particularly apparent in a hardware load balancer situation like we're depicting here. The processors deployed within the load balancer are optimized for doing this process, and so they can take a lot of that load off of the back-end servers. Another area of optimization that the load balancer can provide is with caching and compression. So you could take objects which are regularly requested, and rather than sending those requests all the time through to the real servers, which will going to be slower to perform and slower to respond, that data could be shifted so that it's served from memory, which will be faster to respond back to the client, and you no longer need to send each individual request to the real server. One key area of functionality of intelligence that JetNexus provides is our flight path functionality. Now this operates on HTTP traffic in particular, and it allows us to do a lot of things to manipulate the requests and responses as they pass through the load balancer. And again, I'll demonstrate some of the areas of where this can get used actually during the demo time. But some simple things that we can talk about here are things like HTTP to HTTPS redirections, 404 error responses and trapping those and sending other things back. And what we find is once people start looking at the capabilities of FlightPath and what it can do, and more importantly how simple it is to implement, then we find people start using FlightPath more and more. One of the areas of new functionality that's been added in version 4.2 is pre-authentication. So this is a new feature, so rather than sending all requests straight through to the back-end server, we can now act as a gatekeeper and request credentials from the end user before they're passed through, and those credentials can be checked typically back to a Microsoft AD server or any LDAP server, and then if the credentials that are provided are correct, we can then pass that person through their connectivity through to the back-end server. And we can do single sign-on, so we can achieve that across a full domain so people don't have to enter the same details each time. Another new area of functionality within our security space is a web application firewall. So we've now implemented this using Docker technology, so very much of the fore, and this can be downloaded again, as I'll show you, through our application store and added as an extra feature onto the load balancer. What the web application firewall does is basically that provides an additional level of protection for the connectivity and the traffic that is being passed through to your back-end applications. So rather than just acting as a traditional layer 4 firewall, we now go down to the application layer and see whether there is any malicious requests that are sent to the back-end servers, and we can then block that, and again those can be highlighted, those can be recorded, and you can be made aware of activity that is happening. And this basically can protect your application from things like trying to access SQL database and suck information from there and extract a whole string of information from a back-end database. The web application firewall can do that. That's just one of the features. Right, as I said before, please don't forget to submit any questions via the chat. Now it's time to head on over to do a live demonstration. So just bear with me while I switch screens, and then we'll actually be able to see the JetNexus in operation. Right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is, because people typically like to see how things are set up, is just show you a little bit about the environment that I'm actually utilizing here to be able to give this demonstration. So you can see I've got an ESXi host here, so I'm using virtualization to do this, and I'm just going to log into that and show you very briefly the console interface for JetNexus. And basically this is how you would deploy the product. You can download the virtual image, deploy, as we say, a pair of virtual appliances to provide resiliency for the load balancing functionality. Now if I just show you just on here, this is the IP address that for the first appliance that I'll be connecting to, and then we've got a second appliance that's running on .12 there. The process of configuring and setting up the appliance is really simple and straightforward. All that needs to be done is, once the image has been imported, you do the typical thing of configuring your network adapter to connect to the appropriate VLAN interface that you want the load balancer to operate on. We can support up to 8 interfaces in a virtualized environment, so that's more than enough to cater for any eventualities. Most people end up typically using a single interface. Excuse me. when you first run up the appliance, once you set that networking interface, you'll be prompted to enter a management IP address, subnet details, default gateway, and then DNS. And then literally that is the end of it as far as any sort of requirements to do any CLI configuration. Here you can see confirmation on here of the management IP address that this particular box is being configured with. And as I say, once you get to that point, then you can switch over to using your web browser for everything else. So that is what I will do now, and I will log in to my JetNexus appliance, because you saw there very briefly that come up on the screen, because obviously I'd already logged on to the box previously. Just make sure everything's working like you've got to do. So hence it's taken me straight through to the top screen and the first screen. Here obviously ordinarily you'd be prompted to enter your credentials. This is just one of the appliances, and as I say, there's a second appliance that's already been set up, and I can show you that has been clustered with this appliance. So anything that is done on this one appliance is copied, and configuration is copied over to the second appliance. And should there be any problem with this appliance, the second appliance will automatically take over in that event. So the first thing that I'd like to do is show you how simple and straightforward it is to just set up a basic load balanced so a single VIP load balancing across three real servers. So here, to do that, I go in and I add a virtual service. This will prompt me to enter in the IP address for that I want the clients to connect to. So in this particular instance, I'm going to use 10.4.10.101 as my first VIP IP address. Subnet mask 255.255.255.0 in this case, and then because we're operating at the application layer, obviously the port, everybody knows default port for HTTP is port 80, and last but no means least on the end here is a selection of the service type. Now this determines how deeply the load balancer will inspect the traffic. And as we mentioned, to do things like flight path, where we're manipulating traffic at the HTTP layer, then we need to select clearly HTTP as the service type. If you're load balancing traffic which is non-HTTP, then you've obviously got a selection here of other protocols that you can choose from, and typically you would drop back to using layer 4 TCP. But then obviously that removes the ability to do things like flight path functionality on there. We've got a field in here where we can put a service name in there, and that allows us to be able to identify this when we've got lots of services configured on the box. So then I click update, and then that'll push me down in the section below my real servers. So this is where I'm actually going to load balance the traffic across. So in this instance it's 10.4.10.201 is going to be my first server, and the port that it's using here is, I've left it as port 80. We can do waiting now on this release, and we can add in some notes as well to this. So I'm just going to click update on that, and that will configure my first appliance, and you can see the LEDs have all gone green. That's always a nice sign, and so it shows that the service is online. Now clearly we want to do load balancing, so we need to add in more than one server, and I can do that by clicking copy server here on there, and then that allows me very quickly and easily just to change the IP address and add a second server, and we will add a third server as well once that one's done. Okay, so we copy server again, change the address to 203, click update, and now we've got 3 servers that are configured to load balance and across. Now obviously clearly that has been done using the default set of parameters, and we'll go through how you can modify those parameters for other particular workloads and other particular requirements. But let's first see that in action. So if I open up a new tab here, and if I click on my demo link here, this will take me to the that VIP, and if I'm refreshing my browser now, so you can see new requests going to that VIP, and you can see those being load balanced across the 3 back-end servers. So in this particular instance, we turn around and say that there's no persistence going on. We're not sending the user always to the same back-end server. So this is pertinent for normal web server load balancing and things like Exchange 2013 or Exchange 2016 load balancing, where persistence isn't required. Okay, now we've configured that one service. Let's go ahead and configure another service so I can show some other functionality through flight path, and I'm going to configure another service using 443, so a HTTPS service. So again, I can choose the option to copy that service, which will speed things up for me. In this particular instance, all I want to do is change the port, so we're going to go to 443. Still want to keep it as HTTP type, so I'm going to click Update on that. So that's done the bulk of my configuration. I'm doing HTTP offload in here because obviously it's chosen to send to the real server still on port 80. Obviously we could change that port if we wanted to go to 443, if we wanted to still do re-encryption. So one of the things that I've now got to do, because I've set this to HTTPS, clearly I need to be able to present a certificate out to the end user, and that's configured under the Basic tab. So we've got the client side here and the real server side here. Now the first thing that you would obviously need to do in real life is go and actually import your certificates actually onto the box. So that's found under the library section here, and SSL certificates, and through this interface you can now go and import a certificate onto the box, import a single certificate, and we work with certificates in PKCS12 format. So you can typically export the certificate from your back-end server and then you're able to import it into the load balancer. Now that's already been done for me to speed things along a little bit, or I can use the default certificate, which is there obviously, which is the same certificate to use for the management, but I need to select that on here. So I'll just select default certificate, update that, and now what I should be able to do is if I go onto here and change this to HTTPS just briefly, you can see that I'm getting through there again now, and I'm connecting to that 443 channel. But I've actually manually had to go and say that I want to go to the HTTPS service in order to be able to do that. Now, JetNexus provides you with means to do that in other ways without having to force the user to enter HTTPS in there. So I'll walk through and I'll set that up. Now, I mentioned before the fact that the services are set up with some basic common settings which you can then go in configure and change. So one of the options is we mentioned about doing layer 7 health checks. So this part here, this server monitoring, is where you would then go and choose to apply a different health check to your service. Now, first of all, we need to go into real server monitor section here and go and configure a particular monitor to do. Now again, pre-built in is one sort of layer 7 health check here, a 200 OK check we call it, and what you can see that this is doing is this is doing a HTTP 200 OK, so we're looking for 200 OK as a response from the server, and we can configure the page location. So I will just apply that service to the first service on here, and you'll see that that will still pass our health check. So, and we can apply multiple services. So I select the 200 OK, and I'm going to switch off the TCP connection. Now, we recommend obviously always to change so that you don't just rely on a TCP connection health check, because that's only checking to the port, and that doesn't mean to say that there's content still there on the server. And you can see now my service is still running okay. Now what I can do is just to show that health check in action is if I change the port on here to port 81, you'll see that my health check will fail. So it's in a checking mode, and then it's gone into an unreachable mode now. And at the same point, this is the time where you could use the email notification to be proactively notified that this problem has occurred. So let me just change that back down again so that it's on port 80. You'll see that the health check will pass again, and then that server is put back online. So we mentioned before the fact that you could see that if I go to demo, we get a mix of going to different servers there. We're not, there's no persistence being applied at all there, so we can end up on different ones, and that's because the default setting for the load balancing is least connections. So that means we're trying to maintain an even number of connections across our real server estate to keep a common load. Now, in the instance where you need to provide persistence and we're using HTTP, what we can do is we can actually insert a cookie into the response back to the client on their first request that comes in, and then the client will send that cookie back into the servers on its subsequent requests. And then you'll see that if I just refresh this page, so it might move me around once, but hang on, just bear with me a second. So what you should see on here is, just bear with me 2 seconds. So, basic ALB session cookie, update. Oops. Right, that's been applied on there. Now we've got ALB session cookie applied on that first service. Let me just close that tab down. I'll open a new tab. I'll go to demo. And now you can see the cookie's been applied, and we're always going back to the same server, right? Server 1. So it takes a while for the browser to actually sort of pick that up because of caching internally, but now you can see that basically a cookie's been applied to there, and then it's always sending it back to the same place. Right, the next thing we can demonstrate is a flight path rule to be able to shift us over from HTTP to HTTPS. So this is a real strength of JetNexus, is the ability to be able to do these things very easily without having to worry about scripting. So most other load balancer appliances that you will encounter, they will mean you have to get down and dirty with some coding to be able to do some of these things. So here we've got already pre-built here a force HTTPS flight path rule, and we can see what we've got set up in here. We've got no conditions, so basically when we apply this to a service, this will happen to any traffic that traverses that service. But we've got an action configured up here, which is a redirect 302, and we can see where it's sending us to. It's sending us to the target of HTTPS, and we're going to pick up the information from the original request for the host, the path, and the query string, so that we will end up getting redirected to the HTTPS thing. So now what I will do is I'll apply that flight path to my first service, my HTTP service here. So I go on my flight path tab, force HTTPS, apply that there, over. Now that has applied to there. So when I go on to open a new tab up now and go on to demo, and again I'm going to rely on refreshing this, and you'll have to bear with me. I might need to use another browser to do this, but there you go. Now that has taken effect, I'm going to the other service, and you can see that other service doesn't have the cookie persistence applied on it. So now again we're seeing traffic coming from all the different from the 3 different servers, but without having to type in HTTPS up here at all. The load balancer has sent me across to the HTTPS from originally connecting to the HTTP. So another function that we can do as we mentioned briefly, was the 404. So if you get a 404 error, rather than relying on the browser just presenting something back, we can utilize a flight path rule, and I'll apply it onto this service now, and this is going to do a redirect to a page that you configure and you set up on your server in the case that a wrong link is basically sort of requested. So now, if I now put in a another link, and I just put in some gobbledygook in there, and I'll do a refresh again a few times on that, because the first time it's coming from the expecting it to come from the that's coming cached from the browser again. Then let's just see what that rule is actually telling us that it's going to do. So, so if we click on flight path and flight path rules, so the 404 redirect, it says it's in use on there. So we're looking now, we have got a condition of response code. So the response code does contain 404. And we're utilizing the redirect function again. Right, okay, so this is the reason why. So what I need to do is, you can see it's sending the target to HTTP there. So if I just change that to HTTPS now, because I've got it applied on the second service, okay, then it'll pick up that 404 page that we talked about there. So let me just quickly just do that again and refresh. Okay, this is, just bear with me. Okay, it's not playing ball with me, but you'll have to, let me just apply that onto the top service and get rid of the HTTPS redirection that we've got on there just for the moment. And I will apply the 404 redirect onto here. Okay. Okay. Right. It's still doing my redirection, because basically it's the browser has cached this, and so it is still doing my redirection. But so you have to bear with me on that one. Okay. Right. Anyway, let's move on. So as I said, this is not canned, as you can imagine. So there you go. So that's what we're talking about. So, but you can see the principle of what we're talking there in the fact that the load balancer would see the 404 error come from the real server. It would trap that, and then we will do a redirection to the particular page for that. So let's move on to another area that we talked about, which was Exchange deployment, and how quick and easily the load balancer can be used to deploy and load balance across an Exchange infrastructure. Now we've got something called jetpacks to speed that up for us. So rather than having to go through and configure individually each particular service on there, which you can imagine could take a little bit of time, we've created a jetpack, which is effectively a canned configuration. And all you need to do is go and modify the entries for that to match the particular IP addresses that you are using yourself. Now, what I'm going to do is I will just briefly open up the file and show you basically what that looks like. So here is our jetpack with the configuration elements in it to set up all the various different services, the flight path rules and the health checking and the redirections that are basically used on here. And within it, we go and modify the details of the real server IP addresses. I've just got 2 real server IP addresses configured here, but obviously we can add in more. And also the details for the actual VIP IP address that you're going to use. Now that is down towards the bottom here. So this is the VIP IP address that we're using, and so we do a search and replace in here to replace the pre-canned information with the actual VIP IP address, and then with that we're able to upload that onto the appliance. And that is uploaded onto the appliance through the Advanced tab and Configuration. And then it says here you can browse for a config file or a jetpack. Obviously it's a jetpack that I'm looking for here. Here is my file here that I want to apply, and we're going to upload that configuration or jetpack. It prompts us to the fact that it's going to apply it to both appliances in the cluster, which is obviously what we want to do. It informs me that the configuration has been updated successfully. It's going to refresh the page now, and we should see, once it's done that, the fact that it's added in all the additional services for load balancing for an exchange. Now you saw in this particular case that we configured our VIP IP address for 10.4.10.105. And what this particular jetpack does is, rather than send all of the services just purely into port 443, and if one server failed or just one service failed on a server, that would mean we'd have to take that server completely offline, which would be not particularly sensible from a resource point of view, because it may only, as I say, literally be one of the services which has failed. What we do is we actually monitor, utilizing flight path, the traffic going through. We see the particular paths that are being used. So if I go on to flight path now, you can see that it's now added in a string of additional flight path rules here. And if we just look at one in particular here, you can see that what we're doing, we're matching on the path, and we're looking for, in this particular instance, PowerShell. And then as an action from that, what we're going to do is we're going to tend it to use server. So it's going to end up using another one of the services, and it's going to use server ending in port 9. So this is just purely internal within the load balancer, so it doesn't matter what ports we actually use. And if I select the port 9 one here, and we look on the services for that, you can see that that is being sent again to port 443 at the back end server. So the traffic is ending up at the same place. But what this means is we can actually individually health check each of those services, and if only one of the services fails, we only need to take that service out for that particular server, and as I say, not take a whole service. So the only other step that we would need to do, apart from doing that import, is to deal with the certificate side of things for our main input 443 channel here, which you've got on here. So under the basic tab, so as we mentioned before, you would have imported your certificate here, and then we'll apply the certificate to there. So either, obviously it's not going to want to be the default certificate, it's going to want to be the particular certificate that you're utilizing for Exchange. You click update, and then that is basically your Exchange configuration done. So I think we could safely say that we could quite easily manage to do that in certainly under a minute, I would imagine. So another area of functionality that's been added, we mentioned before, was pre-authentication. So this is one of the roles where we can now we've been able to for a while, but an additional area of functionality that aids in, say, TMG replacement, or any sort of situation where you want to provide another level of authentication, another level of security for access to your services. So let me go ahead now and look at that. So you can see under the library section here, we've got an authentication option. And I've pre-configured this again just to speed things along a little bit. But this will talk now, we enter in details for our LDAP server, which typically is going to be your Microsoft AD server here. We say what information we need the user to provide. In this particular instance, we're just talking about they need to provide a username element. Then we add a rule that's going to utilize that server here, because we can do different things and we can present the requirements and requests to enter credentials in different ways. In this particular instance, we're utilizing our standard form. A default form, we can add in a message to that, and we can choose a timeout for that authentication session as well. So the fact that we've already done that, then what we do is we need to create a flight path rule to utilize that authentication setup, an authentication rule that we've done. So here under pre-authentication, you can see again I've got no condition to match, but I'm using one of the actions which is authentication, and the target you choose from the drop-down list, which is the name of that rule that we configured there before. So that's basically done. So now what we need to do is go and apply that to our particular service. So we'll apply that again. Obviously, if we're doing authentication, we want to do that on our 443 rule. So we'll go over onto flight path. We're going to get rid of that for the moment. And we are going to apply our pre-authentication rule to that particular service. Right. So now what I'm going to do is open up a new tab, and if I go back, I can go straight to their HTTPS, and that. Let's go straight to. Just bear me a second. Oops. Demo, and we'll make that HTTPS on the front there. So now you can see, rather than being passed straight through to the back-end server, I'm getting prompted to enter some credentials, which I'm going to do. Oops. And now, because I've entered the correct credentials, I remember my own password. It's passed that through. We've passed the information that's obviously on the LDAP server. That's passed as a secure message between the load balancer and the LDAP server, and that's allowed me to be passed through and get connectivity. So that shows you pre-authentication taking place, and we can extend that too with doing as a single sign-on by making that authentication go across multiple domains as well. So that shows pre-authentication. What I'm going to do is I'll just remove that now, because the next thing that I want to show you is another key area of functionality that's been added into this 4.2 release, and this is all part of a whole new infrastructure with an app store behind it that allows you to download and apply more features and more functionality to the JetNexus load balancer. And one of the key applications that is on the App Store is a web application firewall. Now, web application firewall protects the server at more levels in terms of actually going deeper again in terms of inspecting the requests and the responses from the server, so it stops not only malicious attack, but it can also stop leakage from a server as well. And the process that we do to go and deploy this first, and again I've speeded things up a little bit here, is to first of all go to our App Store and go and purchase the application from there. So you'd create an account on the App Store, and we'd go in and then click on the applications, and you can see one of the applications that we've got on here is the web application firewall. Another one which we'll talk about briefly at the end is a new feature, our global server load balancer, but for now we're talking about the web application firewall. You'd go and purchase that application, and then once you've purchased the application, that will appear in your library of apps, and it would appear down in the bottom section in the library of apps as a purchased application down here. Now, because I've done that, I've then downloaded the application, so that now the web application firewall now sits here in the downloaded app section. And also what I've done is I've also deployed the app. Now you can deploy the app multiple times on the load balancer, and so having deployed the app, it appears under our add-on section, and then it allows me to go and configure the app here. So what we end up doing is we give the web application firewall a name, and we can give it a static external IP address as well. So let me then move on to show you the configuring the web application firewall first. So if I go now, click onto your new tab, and I go WAF management, you can see that external IP address that I've gone to, and I've gone to port 88 and WAF on there, and I can log actually into my web application firewall. So same details, default details, admin and jet and access. And we log in. And the first part that we need to do is we need to tell the web application firewall where it's going to actually send its traffic to. So the traffic that comes in, well, effectively which server is it going to protect and where we're going to send the traffic to. So this is where we fill that. I've pre-filled that information in here. Okay, and the other part that we need to do is, or we can check on here, is what mode that the web application firewall is working in here. We see we've got it working in detection and blocking mode. You can run the web application firewall purely in detection only mode, so then you can see whether there's any malicious attacks or things going on there, and do that before we actually sort of turn it on. So now what I need to do to be able to go and utilize and demo the web application firewall is to be able to configure a service, another service to utilize that. So what I'm going to do here to do that is I can copy this service on here. So I'm going to copy a service just to speed things up a little bit. Okay, and in this particular instance I'm going to copy the service to 2 and update that. So if you remember, that is the IP address that was being protected. Okay, and what I need to do as well is if I copy that service, my 2 service there, just copy that one again, and in this particular instance now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the input port to 443 and update that. But instead of sending it straight to the back-end servers, what I'm going to do is modify where I'm sending that traffic to. So I'm just going to remove these ones for now. And move another one. So this is effectively my input. So this is the traffic coming into the load balancer and then me wanting to send that to the WAF. So in this particular instance, I'm just going to change that name to WAF1. Okay, I'll make sure that I've got a certificate applied on here because this is a 443 channel again. So I'm just going to use my default certificate here. Update that. So now, hopefully that should be everything configured in terms of the traffic. And bear with me 2 seconds. I know why. Best bear me a second. Okay. I'll just change that to TCP connection because clearly, obviously, the WAF isn't going to respond with 200 OK. Okay, so that shows you the fact that that health check correctly sort of taking place there. So instead, we just got a TCP connection now talking to there, so we're connected to that on WAF1. So now what I should be able to do is if I go to WAF URL, oops, just bear with me a second. So what I'm going to do, just bear with me, is just stop and start my WAF service so that it takes on the configuration of there. So let me just go back to services, sorry, library, add-ons, just stop my service. See the name that it's got, so this is where we're sending the traffic through to. As I say, you can choose this name. I'll start There we go. And so now you can see that I'm passing through the traffic. I'm using this URL, which is pointing to that 102 service, and it's now passing through the web application firewall, just as it was without the web application firewall in the way, because I'm not doing anything malicious at all. Now, if I try and do something where it thinks it's a malicious attack, you can see that JetNexus has now blocked that web application firewall that we've got there is blocked it. So that we've got a whole set of rules, OWASP rules basically, that are imported into the web application firewall that this will protect, and we've also got the ability to add in custom rule sets as well. And you can see up here, the eagle-eyed of you might have been able to detect the web application firewall can also do a denial of service function as well. So it's very powerful, it's very flexible, but also very easy and simple to deploy. So last but no means least, I think you've seen what we can do in terms of the flight path rules, and there's lots of different options in here. It's really sort of comprehensive in terms of the ability to be able to do things. So just to give you some sort of indication, in this particular instance for the Exchange, we were looking at the path, but you can look at a whole host of other elements, other HTTP header elements that you can match there, so that only particular flight path rules get triggered. So that's in the condition section, and then in the action section, a whole host of things that flight path can do to manipulate the traffic as it passes through the load balancer. So hopefully you can see that that is pretty comprehensive in terms of sort of functionality there. So I'm going to quickly flip back to and finish off and wrap up with the slide deck. So just bear with me a second. So we've moved on. Hopefully that's given you a good sort of indication in terms of what the load balancer is capable of doing. And as I say, I'd be more than happy to go through and do a one-to-one session with you. So we've talked about reverse proxy functionality, we've talked about server health monitoring, so this is just a bit of a functional recap. Clustering, the fact that we can have two devices or multiple devices together to provide failover for the load balancing functionality. We're providing layer 4 to layer 7 load balancing, so we're actually looking at the HTTP traffic itself, and a new function that we're added in is global server load balancing. I'll talk very briefly about what sort of functionality that can do. We've talked about SSL offload, so in terms of secure application delivery, we can do SSL offload and encryption. We can do some IP address whitelisting through the firewall, through the flight path functionality. We've got pre-authentication and single sign-on, and we've also got web application firewall. So we like to think that we've got very unrivaled ease of use. We've got jetpacks there to speed up deployment. We've got comprehensive reporting. We didn't even get on to look at any of those sorts of side of things. We've got SNMP, MIB, that you can retrieve information from. We can output to syslog, we can output to email, we've got custom dashboards and a very simple and easy to use interface. In terms of how the products can be deployed, we can be deployed as a virtual load balancer, we can be deployed as a hardware load balancer, we can be deployed in Azure as a cloud load balancer, and as I say again, we've got a cloud service provider program option as well. Just touching very briefly as a last element in terms of, and this is really a bit of a teaser for you, is the global server load balancing functionality which we're just releasing on the product. You can see that that is now available in the App Store to download. And the things that this is capable of doing, this really takes the ability for us to be able to support load balancing across data centers, and that's across data centers where the IP addressing we're talking about at layer 3, where the data centers don't have stretched VLANs, they don't have layer 2 connectivity. And what it provides for is data center redundancy, data center localization, so in other words, sending customers to the most appropriate one, and data center performance optimization, so we can do things like monitoring load actually on servers and on the particular data centers, and spread out that load. So it may not necessarily be that the local data center is optimal for serving somebody's traffic if that data center is under heavy load. Right, so just bear with me 2 quick seconds. So one thing, again, as a very sort of quick sort of recap, is the fact the ability that we've got a I could take any questions from you if you like. What I'm going to do is those questions that have come in, if that's okay, is we'll contact you sort of directly and deal with that rather than holding other people up, because I'm very conscious of time. Another thing that JetNexus is capable of providing, although the product is very simple and easy to use, we can also provide professional services. So if you want somebody to come in and either assist with the planning and deployment of a load balancer, or the actual deployment side of the load balancer, whether that be on-site or whether it be remote, we're able to offer that service. Don't forget, you can download a free trial. So if you go to www.jetnexus.com, you'll find on the home page there the fact that you've got a link where you're able to download the free trial and able to put this thing through its paces. And again, if you contact us, the product is automatically licensed for 14 days, so you don't need to request license keys straight off to go and do that. That's the usual typical sort of process for doing trials. As soon as you install the product, it'll be functional, and it'll be functional with 2 VIPs and 4 real servers. But if you do want to get in contact with us once you've deployed it, you can pass on the machine ID of the product, and we can extend the trial, extend the capacity and extend the time of the trial. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much for joining, and thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to contacting you and speaking with you further on down the line, and of JetNexus being of service for your load balancing requirements. So thank you all again once very much for joining, and I'll sign off and say goodbye. Thank you.